Hello, my creator friends, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Prompt. This is Wednesday Q&A, where we take a look at questions that have been posed in the YouTube comments section, or sent to me by direct message on Instagram or Twitter at Fast Screenplay, or via email. Every so often we'll just pick something random out of the queue. But if you have any questions about any aspect of screenwriting or storytelling or the industry or independent film or what I'm trying to build or Fast Screenplay or anything at all, be sure to send us a question, post it in the comments below on the YouTube channel here, and we will get to you in hopefully the next episode, maybe next week's Q&A, maybe the week after that, as soon as we possibly can. Now, let's jump into today's questions. Our first question today comes from Braid Bronson, who asks, can you send query emails to companies, and if they accept your script, slim to none chance, sign a release form and you can send it? Well, so here's the issue on query letters. You can, of course, send a query letter to anyone you want to. The question is, will it be read? Will it be taken seriously? Will it be opened? And will it be followed up upon? And the answer is usually no, simply because of the sheer volume of material that gets submitted to producers and production companies. The other huge challenge that we have is that as a producer, as a production company, while it's true that we are always looking for material to produce, we're pretty much open to getting it from anywhere. The reality is there is a sort of litigiousness surrounding all this. There is a very real thing called parallel development, where I think I've mentioned the story previously on this series. I know I've mentioned it somewhere in something that I've said along the way, but at one point when we were accepting submissions from all around Australia, we got 4 different projects from different parts of the country that were all basically on the same topic. It was the Tasmanian tiger. Anyway, it was the challenge for us at that point is if you go ahead, if you happen to be working on a story with the same or similar subject matter, then anyone who submitted their script is going to think, hey, they just stole my idea and ran with it, even if we've already been working on it long before your submission ever came along. Or if there are multiple people sending the same basic ideas, it's very easy to go, hey, they took my idea, when in fact we took a different project. So the challenge that producers and production companies have is that we have to insulate ourselves from those kinds of claims and from that kind of, continuous threat of lawsuit and that kind of thing. So enter the release form. So when we were accepting screenplays, which we're not anymore, but when we were accepting screenplays, we had a release form. It's a pretty standard release form, but frankly, it's relatively draconian. It's very much skewed in the production company's favor. Then there is language in it that says, even if we're working on something similar or identical to the submission, that you release us from liability and that sort of thing. Now, if there is legitimate copyright infringement, then obviously you can still go after a company that you've signed a release form if they've very clearly stolen your work. But the problem is that copyright does not extend to the idea or the premise. Copyright only extends to the execution of that idea or the expression of the idea, which is your specific story. And really, we're talking actual ripping off of pages of your screenplay that's kind of the test for it in reality, under actual copyright law. So in order to avoid all that, producers, production companies have these sort of barriers to entry. So when you are an unknown quantity, when you're a writer, then you don't know them, they don't know you, you're trying to submit your work to them, there's always that sense of, are we dealing with a crazy person here, or is this is this actually the one? We would love to believe that each one is the one, but it really is a needle in a haystack. There really are vast quantities of submissions that are not actually viable. And so that's really what the what that's all about. If you submit a query, you really have to capture their attention and their imagination based on just the simplest of ideas. And because that's very hard to do, that's one of the reasons that I'm suggesting this whole approach that we're trying to build through this thing, right? Which is become a known quantity, and then you'll be able to get them to come to you rather than you go to them. So the basic strategy, sending out a query letter, hoping that they go, hey, send us your script, sending in a release form along with it. That is possible if the company's open to it. More and more companies are just closed off to all submissions and just try to develop material in-house or with writers they know and that sort of thing. So yes, it's all possible, it's doable, but it's probably the most challenging road. And you have to always remember that there are countless other people also trying to do the same thing. And the producers and production companies working on their current projects, the things they've got in development, the slate that's coming up. There's just a lot of attention elsewhere. So trying to break through that noise, I believe, is not necessarily the most effective strategy. Next up, Dracon asks, what is the possibility of a producer listening to a pitch from a new writer and then asking a professional scriptwriter to develop the idea? Should aspiring screenwriters protect their ideas until they have developed and registered the ownership of a complete script? Well, so building upon kind of what we talked about in the previous, a little bit of what I talked about in the previous answer, the reality is that producers are not looking to get ideas from writers and then go off and run off and work with somebody else with them. What we would love more than anything at all is for you to submit a spec project that when it lands on our desk, it's absolutely perfect for us, and we recognize it. We see that we see the market for it. We see how we could package it. We can see how it makes use of all the resources we happen to have right at this moment. It's perfectly in sync with what we want to say and what we care about, and it's ready to shoot right now. That never happens, though, and because it never happens, most often. Now, this question was actually we've sort of edited down and abbreviated it from a much longer sort of question, which was asking about, is it real that producers would listen to logline and actually want to follow up with it from an unproven writer rather than just existing writers? And the reality is that the vast majority of people who are not professionals yet, who are trying to submit from the outside, the simple reality is that the vast majority simply don't have the skills yet, aren't actually able to take their ideas all the way to actually viable, all the way to something that a producer or production company could really use. So it's not so much that producers are looking to find ideas and go take them elsewhere. It's really that those ideas that we're looking to find are almost impossible to find. Think of it this way. If I have an idea in my head for a movie, which I would estimate I probably have somewhere between 20 and 40 movie ideas in here, solid movie ideas. They're just ideas. I haven't fleshed them out. I haven't done anything with them. I have yet to get those writers that will work with me to develop them, which is why I built Fast Screenplay, which is why we're doing the writer's room, all that stuff. But so I have all these ideas in my head. If you pitched an idea and you send in a project and that script wasn't actually viable, it wasn't really ready to go, ultimately, the work involved in turning your idea into an actually viable project in the end is about the same as the work involved in turning mine into a viable project in the end. Either I'm going to have to spend time or I'm going to have to spend money paying a professional writer or someone who's actually capable of doing that to make that happen. So if I'm going to spend the money or the time, I'm going to spend the time on my project. We all are more passionate about our own projects than we are about somebody else's project, all things being equal, right? So you have to, when a writer submits a project that is not perfectly in sync with the producer that they're submitting it to, that is not that does not hit on all cylinders, that is not, viable, that is not compelling and engaging, an extraordinary story and market friendly and all, just ticks all the boxes. If it doesn't actually achieve all that, from the producer's perspective, you're thinking, well, this person sent me their very best work. There's no way a professional writer or someone who aspires to be a professional writer is going to send me anything less than their very best work, right? Why would you blow that opportunity? You're going to send only your very best work to the producer production company. So if this is their very best work and this does not hit the mark, this is not something we could actually use. This is not something that's actually viable, and that this is something that needs further development, that we need to pour our time and money and resources into getting this to where it needs to be. If that's the case, the inbuilt assumption is that this writer who sent it in is not going to be able to do that, because if they were able to do that, they would have done that before they submitted it, right? So if the project is not aligned, if the project is not pro level, if the project is not production ready, if it's really not at that high standard, then you really are dealing with something that's not viable. So if it's not viable, then what do? If we really, really like the idea, we just have to go through that whole effort of making it viable. The problem is if we pay a screenwriter to further develop a project, that money is not recoupable until you make the movie and the movie makes money, right? So any development expenses, those are just that's blown money. There's no way to make that money back until your movie makes money. So that's a huge gamble. That's a huge bet. And ultimately, producers generally have so many ideas or projects in their own head, or the people that they know and they like and they want to work with. We've all got ideas, Ideas are everywhere. The question is, who's going to take that idea all the way to what it needs to be? And how much are they willing to invest, whether it's time or money? You, the writer, are investing your time into it. A producer has to either invest our time in it. I got to write, and I'm focused more on building this machine here than on actually writing. So my writing skills would be a bit blunted at this point. So I need the writer. So if you don't have those skills, you need to hire someone who does have those skills. That person, they may be perfectly talented, they may be perfectly great at what they do, but they may also, develop a project you can't actually use still. So there's a lot of money that's over the years from big companies, big studios and everything that has been poured into development on projects that didn't go anywhere. All that money is just gone, right? So big studios obviously there's from the profits from their other films, they can sort of absorb those costs. It's part of the cost of doing business. But for independent producers, that's really you just don't have the funds to do that. So the other question sort of in this, which is, should aspiring screenwriters protect their ideas until they have developed and registered the ownership of a complete script? The implication is that if I don't have a perfectly viable script, then they could take my idea and go run off with it with somebody else, and it's unlikely. It's possible, I suppose, but just the idea itself isn't something that you can actually copyright. So in my opinion, yes, always. I'm not a big fan of putting your log lines out there on your websites or services that put your website for people that you don't know to have a look at them, because it's very easy for someone to go, hey, that's a really cool idea, and go off and make it, especially if your writing sample isn't quite up to speed, right? So at the end of the day, I'm a big believer that, yes, you should follow all the way through the whole process, the complete process, right? So it's really about not just finding and developing that idea, it's turning it into an extraordinary story, it's refining it, it's making sure that it lands with the reader the way you want it to land with the reader. It's perfectly aligned. So by the time they see your screenplay, It's unavoidable. It's a project they have to say yes to. Now, there's always going to be some development involved. Your actor's 10 years older than the character in the script, or we have this location or that location, we got to change things around. So there's things that are going to happen during production, but ultimately, before you ever submit your project, yes, I believe you should have your idea nailed down. You should have your script perfectly nailed down so that it is ready to go and it is perfect for the producer that you're submitting it to. I don't think you should submit anything prior to that. I don't think you should post your ideas online prior to that. But it's the nature of the beast as well. I also believe that we all have an infinite number of ideas in us. Ideas spark ideas. So I don't think we should be as precious about each of our ideas either. If you have developed your project to the point where you're ready to pitch to a producer, then yes, refrain from sharing that idea all around, right? Because you have a project to back it up. Use that log line as the hook. At the end of the day, that's all your log line is. That's what your pitch is. Your pitch is the hook. It shouldn't be, your pitch isn't about selling them this story idea. It's really about getting them interested to then read your screenplay. And your screenplay is what's going to have to wow them, right? Or your one-page synopsis. The story, how you fleshed it out, is what's going to wow them. So until that's in place, I would not put that stuff up online anywhere. If you want to have some burner ideas, if you've got 10 or 12, 15, 20 ideas and lots of different good stuff, and you're a super creative person and you want to create that website and demonstrate your skills, and you don't care if someone steals your idea, it's really a showpiece for you. Those are the things that you would put on those sites or on your website to promote yourself as a writer. That's my take. That's my opinion on it. And lastly, Dreaming Life asks, if you have seen 15,000 plus screenplays and only about 1% of those are viable, how often do you think a non-viable screenplay can be reworked to be viable? Not by its writer who falls short, but by you. And what prevents you from ever dipping a toe in those waters? So I've sort of addressed this. I sort of answered this in the previous question. Just to clarify, if you're new to me or this channel or what I do, it's not 15,000, it's actually closer to 30,000. So my production company, Embryo Films in Sydney, spent about 18 years looking for material to produce. We received nearly 30,000 project submissions. And I say that only 1% of those projects is viable. What I mean is that only about 1% of those projects would be viable for us. So in other words, it's a viable submission. So when you think about how you're going to submit, when you think about submitting to a producer, let's say you've written an extraordinary script, but it's a horror film script. And as we know throughout this series, horror film's not the kind of thing that I make or would be interested in saying yes to. So even if your script was a viable project, a horror film project, if you submitted it to me, it's not viable for me. So it's not a viable submission, right? So when I say that only 1%, is that right even? It's 1 in 1,000. So only about 1 in 1,000 projects that came into us were something that we could say, I like that. It's viable. It's ready. We could actually do something with that. Now, in our case, we received about 24, 26, 28. I can't remember the exact number, but it was one of those projects that were stuff that we would actually go, this is what I would want to make. And for every single one of them that we reached out to, they were all optioned elsewhere by the time we found them in our submissions. So about 1 in 1,000 of the project submissions that came in were something that we could actually say yes to. So if you take any production company and you say, of the submissions they get, how many are actually something that they could say yes to, it would be about that 1 in 1,000. Now, the number of screenplays out there that I would say are, if not production ready, viable, at least sort of that pro caliber, at least that sort of well-written enough screenplay that you could attract the right person's attention. I would say it's probably more on the order of about 10 to 15% of the projects that get submitted, the projects that we saw submitted anyway. So for example, out of 30,000, you're looking at somewhere 2,000 to 3,000, I would say. Maybe that's even less than 10% then, but 2 to 3,000 maybe projects that you go, well, if you were the right kind of producer for this and you had an eye towards further development of it, the writer might be able to get it to where it needs to go and get in sync with you. 10% or so. The other 90% of all submissions are not usable by anyone anywhere. And that's kind of the frustrating thing for me. That's the thing that I've been trying to sort of express. So then the question here is, how often do you think I'm assuming that 90% could be reworked into something in that 10% or even that 1%, and maybe not by the writer who's not able to do it, but by us. Here's the problem. And when you really think about screenwriting, when you really think about the complexities of the craft and how, this is one thing I don't think writers fully appreciate, is that literally everything in a screenplay is interconnected with literally everything else. There are so many interconnected dynamics and moving parts. In Fast Screenplay, we literally cover about 300 to 400 different skills that you really need to know and learn and more or less master to be able to do this at a pro level. It's that kind of complexity. It's not just story structure and characters and dialogue and the plot. It's things like your motif, and it's things like your story world, and it's things like the setup payoff dynamic and how what happens over here is going to set up certain expectations within your audience. And as it goes along, if you go in a slightly different direction, it might feel a little wrong, but the further you go in a different direction, the more wrong it is. And there's so many subtle and artistic dynamics to the whole thing that when a project is in that 90%, when a project is not viable at all, it really is a situation where you just have to start over. They have this thing in screenwriting called the page one rewrite, which basically means completely rewrite the whole thing again from scratch, right? Start over. So often that, from what I've seen anyway, from those 90% of projects that are just not viable by any producer, you're literally talking page one rewrites for all of them, or the vast majority of them. I don't want to give you random percentages, but like the vast majority would be page one rewrites, and you'd have to completely start over. So the question really becomes, so what prevents us from dipping our toe, what prevents me from dipping my toe in that waters is, I don't want to start over on a project that's kind of fuzzy at best in the direction of where we'd want to go. So maybe implied in this, there's the question of how many submissions were ideas that were great that we couldn't actually go forward with because the project wasn't there yet. And I would say honestly that the number is tiny. The number is 1% maybe of that. It really is, I taught live screenwriting workshops for about 5 years in Australia. I went all around Australia and I was teaching these interactive workshops with like 12 to 15 people. And it's one-on-one, and it's really talking to every single person throughout the whole week. It's a full weekend thing, a very intensive, the weekend screenwriting workshop, I originally called it. And everybody would, at a certain point along the way, I decided to have everybody sort of pitch their idea more or less, and we would talk about the different ideas. And in all of the workshops that I ran, probably 1,000 people or so, I had one idea that I went, I can do something with that. One out of all of them. And is it just me? Maybe it's me. Maybe it's my style. Maybe it's the kinds of things that I'm interested in. Maybe you have other producers there who are interested in other kinds of movies that would have listened to some of the other stories and went, ooh, I like that one. And this is the thing you have to always keep in mind is I'm giving you the producer's perspective, but I'm really giving you my perspective as an independent producer outside the studio system, who's been trying to find material, who spent 18 years searching for material. And the material that I came across and the kind of stories that I would want to make and all that kind of stuff. So there are so many variables that it really is hard. But for me to answer this question, the thing that would prevent me from dipping my toe into that goes back to the earlier answer, which is that if there's my idea or if there's this idea that we could work on to make better, which one am I going to pour my time and passion into? And I would always pour my time and passion into the ideas that, come from my brain because I'm super excited about them. The problem is, if you don't have the time to write because you're trying to do the producing, you're trying to build the independent film studio, you're trying to do all this other stuff, you need writers to do that. And those writers are obviously going to be passionate about their ideas. So it really is about helping writers tap into their ideas and develop their ideas through the process, and then find the ones that are in sync, or in the independent film studio, work on the projects that the writers are excited about to do that, to learn the development side of things. So that's really the answer for me. I would imagine that's probably, or a similar answer would be what other producers would tell you. I can't speak for them, but that's what I would believe based upon just the dynamics of it, the economics of it, the workload of it, and all that. So at the end of the day, don't imagine that you're going to go out there and pitch a half-baked idea and that it's going to get any traction, because it's not. You're not going to get traction with anything less than an extraordinary project, something that has an idea that is both extraordinary in its own right and fully realized as a story and a project, a screenplay, and that it's been refined and perfected. And when we open those pages of that script, bang, page one, we're in it. Whoa, tell me, this is great. And it's a fast screenplay. You're tearing through it, trying to find out what happens next. Page turner, page turner, page turner. And at the end, it exceeds your expectations. It's way beyond what you thought it was going to be. I can't stress enough how, if you can create that, the world is your oyster. The doors will swing open, because all you need to do is get a couple of people within that sort of ecosystem to read the project, and it's so rare that it will spread, it will get noticed. And it's not easy to do that. It's hard to do that. It takes time to learn and develop that craft. So I know that writers are always thinking, how can I sell my idea? You can't. Not really. I'm sure there's probably the exception out there, but you can't. You have to put in the effort, you have to put in the time, you have to develop the skills and the craft, and most importantly, the story and the screenplay, so that when they read it, it blows them away. That's the goal. And that's why you have to take action every single day. So thank you for joining me on Wednesday Q&A here. Is it Q&A Wednesdays or Wednesday Q&A? Not sure. We'll work it out one way or another. But thank you for joining me. Make sure to take action today, even if it's just a little bit of action. We got to keep those wheels moving forward. We have to keep developing those skills inch by inch by inch, day by day by day. That's the only way you're going to get where you're trying to go. So when you're finished with this, stop. Think, filter, ponder, take it through your own experience and imagination and psyche. And if you can only put in 10 minutes today, put in that 10 minutes today. Really, 10 minutes. Come on, you can do that. If you can put in an hour, put in that hour. Really go for it. And if you can spend all day on it, I tip my hat to you. I am jealous of you. Anyway, whatever you do, take action. We will see you tomorrow. Thanks for watching.